poverty as well as sharing our prosperity. And with me is a very distinguished panel of 4 analysts and academics. So we will start with our first speaker, Mr. Manokaran Mottain, who is the Chief Economist of Alliance Bank Malaysia. I think our speakers, they would have about 10 minutes each to make their presentation. Afterwards, we will have a Q&A session. Please, Manu. Please upload Manu's slides as soon as possible.
Very nice. Good morning, and thank you, Dr. O. It's a beautiful morning to meet you all here. And first of all, we know that we are in a very difficult situation, challenging times, and we have not recovered, but we are seeing this lights at the end of the tunnel already. If you notice, some regional international agencies are already still, very recently came out with some numbers that shows they are still pessimistic so far. If you look at it, 2020, World Bank estimated that it will be growing at a slower pace than the previous estimation, which was done somewhere in June 2019, 2.7%. So it's just a slight slowdown. But if you notice that the emerging economies are still the engine of the growth at the moment. So it is growing at 4.1%. Some of I'm here to highlight what are the challenges or what are the issues that the globe as well as Malaysia is facing. First of all, we had the US-China trade conflict, which was recently signed amicable solution, but it came out not as expected. We thought that all the tariffs will be removed and back to normal and all that, but now, according to the trade deal, it is a 3-phase or 2-phase. First of all, some USD worth of 76 billion will be sort of like, the first tranche of 120 billion tariff on China has been removed. And the second one, 250 billion, was not included in this trade deal. So you can see that it is positive and negative. Okay, positive that we can see that the international trade and the investment will recover soon. But what is negative here, especially for Malaysia, because in the deal, China has said that they will import soybean import some 12 billion from the US, and so soybean is a competitor for CPO. Okay, so that's where we will be affected. The other challenges or issues that is facing the globe is the new one, that is the Middle East crisis. Okay, after the US-Iran conflict, we are seeing that the crude oil prices are escalating, and if you look at it, it has hit about the high of $70 per barrel, whereas Malaysia's recent budget estimated for this year is 62 billion. So it's a double-edged sword. Okay, if you notice, higher oil prices is good for the revenue, country's revenue. Okay, every $1 up in international crude oil price, we will, the government revenue will go up by as much as 300 million. On the other hand, okay, the oil prices are going up, so the government is still has not floated the pump prices, so as such that they have to incur more subsidies, okay, as a result of all this hike in oil prices. In our calculation, some 220 million subsidy will be spent, okay, if the oil prices are, at this kind of level, okay, because, RON 95 and diesel is a control, okay, at the moment. So there you have to increase. So for this year, government's budget estimated about to 24 billion as subsidies. So if the prices are going up, or in the range of $70, and then you will be likely to incur more subsidy. Okay, and palm oil. Palm oil is very important for Malaysia, but recently what happened was, because of, we are good in talking, okay, we can talk anything for that matter, and we talk, we don't think, okay, what is the implication? And this is what is happening. CPO has been barred, import ban on crude palm oil and refineries, okay, refined palm oil. So as a result, our import is coming down. And we know that the contribution from crude palm oil was, we were one of the number one exporter for palm oil to India, especially India. So now, if you look at it, in terms of your import or export to India has come down from 310,000 tons in September. Now, the recent numbers only showed about less than half of it, 139,000 tons of export to India. So who is making up the rest? Indonesia. Okay? Indonesia is taking this as an advantage to export more. So you can see that the eventual impact is Malaysian GDP growth. Okay? We think that, it should be, when we are thinking that, like I said just now, I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel, but these things, these issues have sort of like delayed the process of recovery. Okay? So that's one thing. Okay? And so as a result of this, we are losing our market share in palm oil. Okay? And what's important is for our GDP, the first important thing or the major contribution to GDP is the private consumption. That's about 60% of our private consumption. Our GDP contribution. GDP is coming from private consumption. So anything and everything the government measures aim at promoting consumption is good. But in this case, the other factor in contributing higher GDP growth is the investment part. The investment is not growing. Although government claims or reporting some beautiful numbers in terms of approval, but it is not showing on some 20% of the growth is coming from total investment. So in this case, where is the problem? So we had a talk over 1 week ago. Somebody from MIDA came to deliver a talk, and he told me that he can see it is not growing because what is coming in is not offsetting what is going out, okay, in terms of FDI. Okay, so companies are repatriating the profits and all that. So they are not, putting back in our system. So that's the reason why we see some bad numbers on the private investment side. Okay, so that is one thing that the government need to address. And as a result of this investment, direct impact will be on the manufacturing. And manufacturing contribution at the moment is shrinking.
1 million.
Okay, moderator is very, very strict. Okay, so I got to call it off. Okay, what is positive here in Malaysia is the low inflation numbers. Somehow we don't agree. I mean, a lot of them, they don't agree. What do you mean by inflation is low? Less than 1% and all that. That's the official number. What you are spending is a different thing. At the moment, is officially, Malaysia is registering less than 1% growth. And then compared to next one is, for next year, or for this year, we are looking at around 2%. Okay, and that also on the assumption that how fast this floating of the RON 95 and diesel going to come in. Okay, so overall price factor is in favor for our private consumption. Okay, so all in all, I put all these numbers, and our hope is we still can see decent growth of 4.5%, okay, compared to government's 4.8%. Why I am saying decent growth? You must understand the economy is growing, okay, as it grows further, and if you can see a growth between 4 and 5%, I think that's already a decent growth, that I consider. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Manu. Thank you. Next, we have another chief economist from IQI Global, Mr. Shan Saeed.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Tansari Michael Yeo, ladies and gentlemen, my friends from press and media, Assalamu alaikum, and a very pleasant morning. I have already shared with Banama, this is my cheat sheet, 2 days back, and 2 weeks back with Estro. For this year at IQI, we believe that macroeconomic stability is going to drive Malaysia's growth story. We are foreseeing GDP between 4.4 and 4.9. If you pick up the latest issue of Economist magazine, they are saying 4.8. So what does it actually mean when I say macroeconomic stability? It means we see economic stability, we see political, we see policy consistency, but most importantly, it is all about economic confidence. In the last 10 years, 2 factors have emerged significantly. One is fear and the other is confidence. And these are the 2 non-economic variables in the global macro equation. So we foresee GDP between 4.5 and 4.9, and we are cautiously optimistic about the growth story. Secondly, about ringgit. We foresee ringgit between 3.97 and 4.30. We have been sharing this for the last 3-4 months. The premise is very simple. US dollar will stay low because it's an election year. Number 2, why US dollar will stay low? Because American corporates are holding $2.7 trillion away from US.
So President Trump wants to get that $2.7 trillion because the American corporates, they get the exchange rate advantage. The third, why US dollar will stay low, because it's an election year. President Trump wants Fed to keep interest rate low. If you look at American history, in 1970, when Nixon was aiming for the president, and in the 80s, when Reagan was the president, they did the same. They lowered the discount rate and they won the election. So we foresee where Democrats, they don't have any candidates, Biden, Warren, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders, we don't have any hope. I think President Trump will come back again for his second term. Thirdly, about Chinese yuan. Nobody's talking about it. Phase number 1, trade deal is insignificant. Nothing happened. The Chinese have just given him a phase saving so that he can go back to his voters and farmers and say, I have done the deal with the Chinese. If you see, Chinese announce the deal after 8 hours. And how the game is played, it is very important. If you have studied strategy, it gives you a very interesting perspective. I am basically a strategist. Chinese yuan has appreciated 1.2% in the last 27 days. America imports from China. Chinese yuan appreciates, imports become expensive. Who suffers? The American consumers. So it lowers your purchasing power, it lowers your living standard. Nobody's talking about it, but Chinese are playing the master stroke in a very strategic manner. It's a tactical move. It will hurt the American consumers more. So what happens? The prices go up. Fed is going to raise interest rates. American consumer suffers again, and the economy goes into subpar growth. This was exactly shared 30 years back by one of the Nobel laureate professors from University of Chicago named Milton Friedman. And the name of that book is Money Mischief. Chapter number 8, how Fed is going to create inflation. Now you have QE4 back into the market. The repo market still wants liquidity from the Fed. The Fed has injected $2.9 trillion in the last 4 months, starting from September. So I think the game is on. The Chinese are playing very beautifully. Nobody's noticing. Chinese yuan. Chinese yuan will be used in the next 3 to 4 years by many emerging economies. If you see, Malaysia is part of Belt and Road, a very important player. If you have read Belt and Road Blue Paper that was published in May 2015, the game is in the south. You have Northern Corridor, the Central Corridor, and the Southern Corridor in Belt and Road. China is landlocked from 3 sides, the north, south, and the west. It's only open from the eastern side. 95% of the Chinese population lives on the eastern side. So the ship, when it moves, it goes to the state of Malacca. So Malaysia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Djibouti, these are the important countries of BRI. And I was fortunate enough 2.5 years back when I was invited by World Bank and IMF to attend their meeting, courtesy my professor. The first 3 countries that I mentioned with Belt and Road were Malaysia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So in ASEAN, you have 3 countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines are important for Belt and Road. Now we come to infrastructure. Infrastructure has direct correlation with GDP growth. One of my Nobel laureate professor, I'm sorry I'm quoting my professor a lot, Robert Fogel wrote a paper in 1964 and he mentioned about how infrastructure investment can spur growth, and he studied about Japanese railroad system called Shinkansen and American railroad system. So I think Malaysia is doing the same. The government is quite focused on technology. Technology will actually help spur growth for many economies in the next 5 to 10 years. Global investors like IQI and many others, they're looking at economies where labor is tech savvy, where government is focusing on 5G and AI. 5G, by 2025, there will be 1.2 billion users. 1/3 will be coming from China. So China is leading the race. AI, 2017, the AI market was $16 billion. By 2025, the AI market will be $190 billion. So if you calculate the CAGR, it is straight 36%. So AI, EV, 5G, these are the some of the factors. Oil prices, as Mano was talking, geopolitical risk makes a huge impact. We foresee oil prices meandering around $62 and $90 per barrel. The premise is very simple. US dollar will stay low, there will be production cuts, and there will be a geopolitical risk. Discount rate, Yes, central banks have taken sole responsibility in delivering economic outcomes. The discount rate for this year will be 2.5 and 3. Overall, we are cautiously optimistic. Malaysia is part of Belt and Road. If you're part of Belt and Road, you're very much relevant. Massive investment is coming. ECR is going to kickstart. Bandar Malaysia is going to... That will actually help spur growth, and there will be a lot of momentum. I think I have done my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for Manu and Shan, who gave us perhaps an interaction between the global and external environment with our local Malaysian growth factors. And next we have Professor Edmund Terrence Gomes, who will share with us his views on, I think it's the shared prosperity vision, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So please, Professor Gomes.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I was invited today to speak on the shared prosperity vision. That is the main topic, and I like to stick to it because this is a very important document. This is the first document released by the Pakatan Harapan government where they outline their vision for the country. So it's important that we look as to what they have in mind for us. So here, when I read the shared prosperity vision, the first thing that shook me was, this reminds me of the new economic policy which was introduced in 1970, the 20-year affirmative action plan. The NEP was a plan that targeted the Bumiputras. I would argue at the time when they introduced the NEP, it was a very important document. And the noble goals of the NEP, as you can see, it's listed here. But we are now into 2020. We are 50 years on. And when I look at the goals of the SPV and I compare the goals of the SPV with the NEP, whose time I think has passed, the goals are strikingly similar. I'm not going to go into it. You can see for yourself here what it is. So this comes to the point of what are the issues that were not addressed in the SPV. And I'd like to take you through some of them. First, let's go back to the manifesto. The manifesto of the Pakatan Harapan is very clear. No more race-based policies. Policies are going to be needs-based. But if you look at what has happened in the SPV, let's go back even earlier. In May, they won the elections. 2018, they won the elections. On September 1st, 2018, just a few months later, they had a Bumiputra Congress. That Congress became a closed-door meeting. And soon after the Congress meeting was over, then economic advisor to the government, Daim Zainuddin, came out and he said, we are keeping the Bumiputra policy. However, this time, I'm quoting him, he said, this time we will get it right. I looked to the SPV to see how they are going to get it right. I didn't see it. Meanwhile, Azmin Ali, Minister of Economic Affairs, ostensibly responsible for the SPV, here now, when the Bumiputra Congress was over, said, we are going to keep the Bumiputra policy. And Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister in waiting at the time, told Azmin, read the manifesto. No more race-based policies. I'm raising this because if the Prime Minister in waiting is saying no more race-based policies and the government's policy of the day is it will be race-based, predominantly race-based, we have a problem on our hands. What is the policy direction that we are going in when we can't get that fundamental issue correct? The second issue which I want to talk about, which is very important when I looked at the SPV, was what is the nature of the corporate sector? Let's break down the corporate sector. And you can see here the corporate sector. We have business groups, the GLCs, the government-linked companies. We have the SMEs and we have foreign firms. Only the SMEs are discussed. Fair enough. SMEs constitute 98% of the corporate sector. They deserve enormous attention, and I'm happy they did so. But what about the GLCs? The GLCs are a key player in the economy. Why were they not even mentioned in the SPV? And what of China? When we talk about foreign firms, China is a big player. They are the new kid on the block. China has got a significant impact on this economy today. We know it. Look at down there. You can see at the bottom line, digital economy of Alibaba and Tencent. High tech, we have Huawei. Infrastructure, you heard this morning from the Deputy Minister. We have ECRL. We have the Kuantan port. And as far as industry is concerned, we have the MCKIP, the Malaysian Kuantan Industrial Park. This is just a few I'm naming. They are in every sector of the economy. So where is the discussion on China's enormous presence in the economy in the SPV? We have to deal with these facts. And here, let me give you some figures. This figure is important because I'm giving you the figures for the business groups in this country for the year 2018. As you can see, in red, they are the GLCs. If you look at the top 10, 8 of them are GLCs. And if you look below, I've highlighted in brown the Bumiputra firms. I'm raising this point because after implementing the Bumiputra policy agenda for so many years, what are the outcomes? And here you can see, if you go down the list, the only firms that are coming up which have Bumiputra majority ownership, we have to go down to number 42, MMC Corporation, Saeed Mokhtar. Of course, you can go up to 28, M-Bank. M-Bank is under Azman Hashim, but Azman Hashim is selling out. And I give some credit to Kamarudin Merun in Air Asia. But the fact of the matter is, when we look at equity ownership by Bumiputras, we are only talking about one firm in the top 50. Now, this is an important point we have to think about in terms of policy failure. Here is a government figure on the equity distribution. This is the government's figure, not mine. I won't even say it's in the SPV, because it's not in the SPV. This figure was released by the government when they announced the SPV. When it was announced, the minister showed us this figure, but then we don't see this figure anymore. Fortunately, I got to see the figure, and I'd like to show you this figure. Here you have the equity ownership figures across ethnic lines. As you can see, in the year 1970, when they introduced the NEP, the non-Bumiputra figure was only 2.4%, the bottom one, 2.4%. It went up in 1990 to about 20%. The figure there is wrong. It says 2.4%. It's not my mistake, it's the government's mistake. It was about 20%. It's not 2.4%. And then it continues to go up to about 23% in 2011. And in 2015, it suddenly dips to 16%. Bumiputra equity ownership figures are dipping and dipping fast. Let me remind you, this is the figure for 2015. Why didn't the government give us an updated figure until 2017, 2018? Where do the Bumiputra equity figures lie today? Non-Bumiputras, in the 1970s, it was 34.3%. By 1998, it reached a phenomenal 46.8%. This is important. In spite of the NEP, the non-Bumiputras did well in the economy. But then you see, there's a dip. And today, if you look at the Bumiputra equity figures, by the year 2015, it's down to 30.7%. Non-Bumiputras are also losing out in terms of equity ownership figures. In fact, the figures for the non-Bumiputras today is worse than in 1970. So who's gaining? And here we look at the foreign equity ownership figures. In 1970, it was 63.3%. They said we're going to redistribute equity far more equitably, and they took it away from the Bumiputras, from the foreigners, and by 1990 it had dipped to 25.4%. And then you see the rise. And today, foreign equity ownership figures, 2015, it's 45%. 2015. What is the equity ownership figures for foreigners today? These are important issues we got to talk about openly and honestly if we want to know the direction of the economy in terms of where are we heading in terms of equitable distribution, development for all, as the government said in the SPV, no one will be left behind. So let's deal with these figures. Look at the Bumiputra economic figures. This is again from the SPV. The SPV clearly shows that Bumiputras are not doing well among SMEs. In terms of value added, their contribution to the economy is low. This is not my figures. I'm taking it from the SPV. This is what the government is telling us. Here, interestingly enough, they say that the Bumiputras have done very well in terms of the professional sector. To my mind, the Bumiputras have done very well as professionals. I don't know why they put it this way, that they have not caught up. The important thing of the NEP was this. They devoted much attention in 1970 to education. They created good schools, residential schools. They took poor children from the kampungs, sent them to the schools, and then sent them on to university. And these people became the new Bumiputra middle class. That is the success story of the NEP. The ability to create an independent middle class, a vibrant, independent Bumiputra middle class. It was education. And you can see the figures here. I don't know why they put it as a failure. It's actually, to my mind, impressive how well they have done in terms of creating this new middle class. But here, what are the lessons learned? I have only 10 minutes. I don't have much time, so I have to rush through this. What are the important lessons? Even when they introduced the NEP, there was a big debate about duration. For how long? The leaders at that time knew they had to be a time limit. It was supposed to be 10, then they decided 15. Finally, they ended on 20 years. But then it continued. And it is continuing now, including under this government. Duration matters. As you can see, by 1990, the figures looked impressive. And then it's downhill. And yet, they're keeping the policy. The second one, access matters. The policy is meant for the poorest. The policy is meant for poor Bumiputras. Who is getting all the rents from the state? Is it really getting to the people who matter? As far as land distribution has occurred, when they had proper land distribution, you saw Felda, they created a landed middle class. When they had education, proper education, they had a new urban middle class. But when it comes to rents for business, who is getting all the rents? Is it really going to the people who deserve it? The third lesson, the poorest people have been left behind. The fact of the matter is, and this is important, the poorest states today in the country are Bumiputra dominant states. Kelantan, Terengganu, Sabah. Sabah was better off in 1970 than they are today. I'm saying this to you because we really need to look at these issues properly. It's the issue of regional inequality is in the SPV, but where is the new policy agenda? The fourth lesson, quality education. Education matters. We have seen the success of high quality education. Where is the focus in terms of reform of education in this country, which we so badly need? And finally, affirmative action in business is just not working. We were warned about this. Saeed Hussein Alatas, the prominent professor of sociology, told us this idea of affirmative action in business is not a good idea. We did not listen to him. And now the evidence is clear, but we are still keeping the policy. So here, let me end with this. The irony of this all is if you read the SPV very carefully, they do tell us on the left side, this is what they told us. These are the problems that the government told us exist in the country. The government clearly knows what the problems are. But what is the solution? And if they don't act properly in terms of the right public policy, and by this I mean the impending 12th Malaysia plan, where it's not a vision, it's actual concrete policies to take the country forward. If they don't react, you see on the right the consequences of what is going to happen. We need to have this debate because we have to get the 12th Malaysia plan right if you want to take the country forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Terrence Gomes for giving us a refreshing perspective on the shared prosperity vision. So we will round up our session with Professor Datuk Norma Mansell, who is the President of the Malaysian Economic Association.
Thank you. Very fresh perspective indeed. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, Tan Sri Rainer, and my other friends and colleagues in the audience as well as the panelists. Thank you very much for having me here. Now, my perspective will be slightly different because I think although I'm the president of the Malaysian Economic Association, I'm also wearing the other hat of a representing the center that is in an EPF, the Employees Provident Fund Endowment Center, where we focus on social protection and social well-being, which is very important because if you were to study reports and work recommendations on how we should go forward, the focus is on structural reforms in the country, and it involves our social policy, which is very much tied to the economic policy and also the other public policies. So that's where I will be coming from three angles, and they are basically because what's happening in Malaysia is that you cannot delink the Malaysian economy from the external factors or what's happening around the world because our trade is over 100%, more than 100% of our GDP. So whatever happens out there, and I think I'm glad that Mr. Shan Saeed has shared with us, and Mr. Mano as well, is what's happening externally. It will happen to Malaysia as well. So what's important for us is to do what's right in terms of our structure, in terms of our economy, our governance. What should we do to make it right, for us to be able to withstand whatever that's happening globally? Yeah, that's more important for a country like Malaysia because we are also caught in this circle that we did not seem to get out of that circle, whatever you call it. You call it middle income, or you call it a certain low value add trap, or low cheap labor trap. Whatever you call it, we somehow are within that trap and not able to get ourselves out of that trap. So what's important is how do we get out of that trap? Now the government has been, the new government, or it's not new anymore, I would say the government, has the right focus. So I'm sanguine about the future of Malaysia, just like Mr. Saeed. Yeah, I'm very hopeful because I think the seeds are there. It's just whether we follow through. Yeah. For instance, the 3 points that I would like to raise here is number one is on human capital, yeah, which is key in order for us to move forward. And raising productivity. Professor Terence alluded to the fact that about education, the importance of education, not just quality education, the type of education that would enable us to innovate, to value add. So it's not just to follow or to be managing an economy where we assemble things, yeah, but in order for us to innovate. So a lot of funds has to go into R&D and to have the right ecosystem. And within the same context, Tan Sri Rainer is here, the real believer in Industry 4.0. Yeah? And the last budget that we had, the government had it right, that a lot of initiatives had gone into supporting the technology, the Industry 4.0, which is not just about technology. It's about the whole system, engaging the whole system, and working on the whole system, on having on a platform of Industry 4.0, where everything is to be made more efficient. And this is how we increase productivity. So quality education is one thing, quality on technical vocational education is one thing, but enable everyone to think more efficiently and more. So the Industry 4.0 is a good platform for us to step up on our productivity as well. The initiatives are including the Malaysia at Work, having women coming to work, providing initiatives, although I did raise my concern about how we're going to implement this because it has happened in Argentina, I think, that some abuse can happen, but if you are careful in terms of implementation, perhaps we can work around that. And how we are we are working on controlling the foreign labor. Yeah? So productivity is also affected by employers or business would only innovate and upgrade technology if they feel that they don't have a choice. But if you have a choice between paying for technology, because it's cost anyway, paying for technology as opposed to hiring a cheaper set of labor, now which one do you choose? Yeah. So you have to do both. You have to incentivize to go for to adopt technology. At the same time, you have to control the tap or the supply of foreign labor. So that's my point number one. That is on the human capital. Point number two is also the rollout of 5G, which was mentioned by Mr. Saeed. Yeah, the rollout of 5G will give a lot of opportunities. So it ties into my point number two, which is on business opportunities. Yeah, that with 5G, a lot of business can have a different platform, which will enable, for instance, if Professor Gomes was talking about how perhaps certain sectors are monopolized by GLCs, etc., but with 5Gs or monopolized by groups. But with 5G, it would enable individuals, entrepreneurs, and all that to have a better or cheaper option. to move forward. So business opportunities is another structural concern or structural issue that Malaysia is getting it right. I think it is easier for Malaysian business to get credits and to get capital in order for them to invest, although currently capital formation is a bit slow because of the uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is also linked to the political direction or the leadership situation that we are facing. I think the business are looking into what will happen with the leadership change. Yeah? So my response to that is always that even when leaders change in Malaysia, or even when parties change, the policies has always been pro-business. So what's the problem? Yeah? But for business, what they are concerned about is that when you're talking about projects, big projects that will affect the economy. So the big projects will drive small projects, small business opportunities. So I think this is where the direction, people are looking for direction. So the faster we sort out our leadership issue, the faster the certainty will come in among the business communities, because I speak to the business communities as well. So that's my second point. My third point is my most favorite, is the inclusive growth. Now, when you talk about minimum wage, you talk about, even this morning, there's report about school feeding programs, although I have some issues on how that's implemented. Because when you try to segregate the poor from the non-poor, now how many children would like to be known among friends that they are poor? So evidence show that when you segregate, or you want people to be identified as poor, not many people would want to go for that. So when we talk about public policy, we have to also think about human dignity, or the stigmatization of some of these related procedures when it comes to social policies. So social protection is important when you talk about inclusive growth, because social protection would also look into the labor market issues. It is almost like a prerequisite for growth, because unless you have social cohesion, you will not be able to have growth. Yeah? So part of social protection, of course, is growth, is also social cohesion, but it is also about enabling, giving opportunities for people who are not fortunate enough or do not have the right skills and the right capacity in order for them to participate in the productive economy. Yeah? So the minimum wage, for instance, is one of the policies, that although that is the labor market policy, but it is part of social protection. Now, the other aspects of social protection is to enable, to protect, or to enable for the citizens to feel that they are protected, even if they take risks in their jobs, in their lives. And that's how we have innovation, and that's how R&D or can happen in the country, yeah? Because it's only through R&D and we get value add and get quality growth. So I think my time is up. I'll stop here, Dr. O.
Thank you very much, Professor Norma, for tying up our discussion. So I think we have about 10 minutes of question and answer. So those who would have questions, please come to one of the microphones which are strategically placed around the room. Introduce just your name and your question, and then to whom you're directing your question. Thanks.
Hello. Hi. My name is Zarif. I'm a nobody. I'm just a Malaysian citizen. Thank you, Tan Sri, for inviting me. I'm really interested and quite intrigued with Professor Gomes' recent slide about the foreign equities of the ownership in 2015. I was just wondering if you or any of the panelists could actually pressure the current government to actually be transparent on the current equity ownership of the foreign companies, Because as a new government, I think we are supposed to be even more open. And also maybe we have YB Nancy Shukri here, which is in the opposition. Maybe this is your ammunition for the current government. Thank you, sir.
Is there another question? Maybe we collect like 2 questions and then we can answer simultaneously. Yeah, the lady there in... I'm not wearing my specs today, so I can't see very well.
I'm
sorry.
Halima. And I'd like to address the question to Professor Gomes, Terrence Gomes. You have highlighted Bumiputra failure in many of the sectors, except for perhaps education and the growth, the rise of the professional Bumiputras, which you say is a good thing, is a great achievement. Now, you started off by calling out for a non-race-based agenda, policy, whatever you may call it, yet you have highlighted one group, one racial or ethnic group, the Bumiputras. Now, I'm not sure how you reconcile the two. Right, my question to Professor Gomes is, seeing that you have been very critical of the Bumiputra agenda all along, I followed your discourse and your articles. Now, what would you like to suggest to be 2 outstanding reforms that can bring about this drastic change in the mindset of the Bumiputra technocrats and the planners who are supposed to actually introduce policies that bring about the best outcomes for the group as well as for the other groups, ethnic groups? Now, what would you suggest, 2 reforms, just 2, that will bring about this drastic change? Thank you.
Wow, seems like you can't escape. So, yeah. So maybe you can address them first.
Thank you. Thank you. On the first question, this is very important. Where is the data? Why is the government so hesitant to give us the data? Then we can do proper analysis. Why is the data stopping at 2015? We even have questioned whether this data is correct. Because the data that we are giving here, even which the government produces on par value, it's not on market value. We want to know based on market value what is the equity ownership figures. This is a serious problem. We can't do our research in the universities because the government, when we want to get data from them on the poverty figures, for example, on the equity figures, for example, it's just so difficult. I would have thought that after the change of government, there would be more transparency in terms of access to the data. But that does not seem to be happening. On the second point, thank you for raising this. I like this point very much. It is not that I want to speak about the Bumiputra agenda. I am forced to do so. The government, the previous government and the current government keeps coming out with policies which are shaped that way. I would prefer to talk about policies as policies without bringing up the racialization or the ethnic issue. It's time we moved on from discussing issues from a very racialized manner. But when Najib came to power, for example, Najib, when he looked upon the economy, remember at the time it was the global financial crisis, and when he spoke to his advisors, including those in the corporate sector, he was told the problem is the affirmative action policy. And Najib himself in 2009 announced this, no more affirmative action. And soon after he announced it, it was headlines in the Star. Soon after he announced it, there was a backlash from some groups, Perkasa, led by Mahathir Mohamad, and then he backtracked, and they kept it. And in 2013, when he lost the election, when he lost the popular vote, at least in the peninsula, when he lost the popular vote, remember that famous heading in the Utusan? Apalagi Cina mau? And then what did Najib do? He came out with a new policy called the Bumiputra Economic Empowerment Policy. What do we do in such a situation? He was very clear he's targeting the Bumiputras. What do we do as academics in such a situation? Am I supposed to keep quiet and say, I am not going to discuss Bumiputra policies? When I know exactly what is happening, is that proper? I am compelled to say these things because I am responding to what the government is doing. When the government fell, the Barisan Nasional fell, the manifesto is clear: no more race-based policies. Policies will be needs-based. That's my first response to what should our policies look like. I'll say needs-based policies. My first response to that question, what should we focus on? And then there's a backtracking there too. And then they organize a Bumiputra Congress and they'll come out and they'll say we have to keep the Bumiputra agenda. And then Mahathir and Anwar clearly seem to have differences of opinion. The Prime Minister says keep it. The Prime Minister in waiting says don't keep it. And I'm supposed to keep quiet and not discuss it. And I'm now being accused of debating the Bumiputra agenda and being critical of it. As public intellectuals, we are required to speak. I would prefer to speak on policies as policies. I prefer to speak on the shared prosperity vision, on the 12 Malaysia plan, and so on and so forth, just in terms of what is the content. I am dealing with the SPV as it is articulated by the government. Please read the SPV. And if the government is articulating things in terms of the Bumiputra issue, as they have put it there, I am not supposed to discuss it, or cannot discuss it this way. So, my call is this. Policy should be needs-based. We were told we will move beyond race-based politics, race-based discourses for policies. Where is that? That is my call. If we look at the situation in the country today, I feel the government knows what the problem is. The manifesto is very good. The manifesto's got some great things. They talk about the regional inequalities. I worry about Sabah and Sarawak. I worry about Sabah. Sabah, as I said in my talk, was better off in 1970 compared to today. I'm worried about regional inequalities. The poorer states are the states that were targeted for help. Kedah, Kelantan, Terengganu, Sabah. Why are they still the poorer states? So my first point in response, just two, I'll give you two, needs-based policies. Second, I'll go back to education. Look at the quality of education. Look at the quality of our schools. I don't have to get into it. You all know what the state is. Look at the quality of our tertiary education. You're in the corporate sector, you know the quality of the students that are coming out. The human capital quality is really clear. This is a gross injustice what we are doing to the young. Before we can even talk about 5G and so on and so forth, what of just giving them the right kind of education? So I would spend some time. My second agenda would be this: get the education policy right. I'd like to add a third: the corporate sector, the business. We need to do a proper assessment. I've been calling for this. Do a proper assessment of the GLCs. I'm not opposed to state intervention. I'm an active supporter of state intervention because I'm worried about the divestment policy. You divest, who are you going to divest to? They already said wealth inequalities in this country is very great, and you're going to take our major assets and give it back to the richest people in the country. Is that good policy planning? We need to have a debate about that. We need to have a debate about the GLCs. They are key players in the economy. Where is the debate on the GLCs? Why do they even keep silent about it in the SPV? When I showed you the figures clearly indicate they are key players in the economy. You can't run away from that. How are you going to reform them so that they are major contributors to the economy? And what of their linkages between the GLCs and the SMEs? The SMEs are a key component of the corporate sector. We need to focus a lot of attention on the SMEs. I do believe there is entrepreneurial capacity among the SMEs, but we are not tapping it. What is the policy agenda? I'll focus policy agenda on that issue. How to get the SMEs on track. To keep the SMEs here. So those are my 3 points. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Would other panelists like to add to that? Manu, Shan, Professor Norma. Okay, I think I had to call it to call an end to it, because I think the next panel will be waiting, and we are just about right time. Well, thank you once again to all my fellow panelists, and thank you all for listening.